Hi, this is Kern with another Bright Ideas video. This time we're not going to cover any concepts, rather we're going to jump right to the bright idea. I've had this bright idea for a while now, and it's one of my favorites because if you like cars and trucks, you're going to like this one. Now I've come up with a design for an internal combustion engine, and I call this engine the Kernberry engine. And what makes it different from other 4-stroke or 2-stroke engines is that it's purely rotational. I'm going to take you through step by step on how to build the Kernberry engine. Step number 1. We're going to start with the engine wheel. And attached to the engine wheel are the rotational pistons. I'm going to go with 4 pistons just because I like the spacing. Next is the engine casing. The engine casing is like a tube that houses the engine wheel and creates an environment for the pistons to travel through. And the casing would have to be either welded or bolted down to the vehicle frame. Step number 2. In step number 2 we add 4 shutters. So we want the same number of shutters as we have pistons. So with the engine wheel spinning, when the piston comes close to a shutter, the shutter opens just in time to let the piston pass. And as soon as the piston passes the shutter closes immediately right after the piston. I'm not going to go into detail as how the shutters mechanically open and close. If I went into details like that, this video would be way too long. Step number 3. Step number 3 is where we add in combustion. So as the piston travels past the shutter, and once the shutter closes immediately behind the piston, when there is the exact perfect amount of distance between the piston and the shutter, the fuel injector and spark plugs go off, creating combustion between the piston and the shutter. I would as well use regular fuel injectors and spark plugs that most standard vehicles use today. Step number 4. This is a quick step. I'll be adding 4 more shutters. These 4 new shutters, in conjunction with the other shutters, creates a combustion chamber. Step number 5. Step number 5 is more complicated but more interesting. We'll be covering all the different valves. With all the timing done right, and the valves done right, the valves will take care of sucking in fresh air, blowing out exhaust, and even compression. Let's start with the valve that brings in fresh air. This new valve, shown as an orange valve right here, allows air to travel in, but is a one-directional valve and will not allow air to go out. Now, as the engine wheel turns, the piston leaves the combustion chamber. The red shutter closes behind the piston, which creates a vacuum-like effect as the piston travels down the casing, pulling in the fresh air from the fresh air valve. The next 2 valves are for compression. So these 2 valves are shown here. One is a blue valve, the other is a red valve. The blue valve is a one-directional valve as well. Air can only go out. And the red is a one-directional valve too. Air can only go in. Now as the piston travels through the casing, it pushes fresh air through the blue valve and into the compression tank. Then when the piston reaches the combustion chamber and is in the perfect position, the red valve is a timed valve, and at this exact time, will release all the air from the compression tank into the combustion chamber, creating compression. And the last valves that I'm going to cover are to push out exhaust. Here are 3 new valves to push out exhaust. The first one shown as a purple valve, the second one shown as a green valve, and the third a black valve. The purple valve is a one-direction valve as well. Air can only go out. With the green valve, air can only go into the casing. And the black valve is a timed valve, and at the exact time will only allow air out of the casing, out of the combustion chamber. So the engine wheel is rotating, sucking in air, now pushing air to the compression tank, then releases it in the combustion chamber. We get combustion, and then right here we can see the exhaust shown as the dark vapor, and now the piston behind it is pushing fresh air through the purple valve to the green valve and pushing fresh air into the combustion chamber, and all the exhaust air is blown out of the combustion chamber through the black valve. And that's the end of that one piston cycle. Okay, so now just a quick summary of how the engine is functioning at point.
So the engine wheel rotates, moving the pistons through the casing. The piston then sucks in fresh air from the orange valve. Then the piston behind that piston starts to push the fresh air. That fresh air goes through the blue valve into the compression tank. Then that air is released into the combustion chamber and we get combustion. Then air is pushed through the purple and green valves. That forces the exhaust air out of the combustion chamber through the black valve. And with all the valve timings done right in the right distances, the engine will cycle through these steps over and over and over, keeping the engine running.
So now the final step, with all the timing and distances exactly right, is to now take this engine and put it on a crankshaft, but add 3 more of them. As you can see here, each engine wheel should be about 90 degrees divided by 4 differences between piston distances to give the engine a more smooth, more powerful drive. Otherwise, if all 4 rotational engines were going off at the exact same time, would not be as efficient. And here is kind of what 4 of the Kernberry engines on one crankshaft kind of looks like. After making all these designs, I realized that I would use 3 pistons on a wheel instead of 4. I feel that 3 pistons would produce more horsepower and more torque, and I do like the spacing of 3 pistons better as well. Now with 3 pistons, they are 360 degrees divided by 3 apart, which is about 120 degrees. And if you had a total of 4 wheels with 3 pistons, each wheel would be off by exactly 30 degrees to make a nice even spacing. Just a few side notes. If I was to use this engine in a car, I would not stick to the standard automatic transmission. I just feel that it's heavy and overcomplicated with all the planetary gears and such. What I would do is I would have a hydraulic clutch, kind of like a clutch pedal, and hydraulics to shift gears like a standard transmission. And if the car was stuck going uphill, say in traffic, and without having a torque converter, cars are very smart these days and can sense if the wheels are moving without the foot on the gas pedal and could lock the brakes. By the way, if you have any improvements or modifications to any of these Bright Idea designs, feel free to write about it in the comments. Well, that's about it for this video. Thank you for watching, and there will be more bright ideas to come.